Hello, and welcome to the third module of this online foundations class. My name is Jennifer, and I will be your instructor for both modules 3 and 4. First, let's begin with a review of the Effective Instructional Sequence, or EIS. The sequence is the functional objective, where you begin with the end in mind, then setting the stage, which you studied in the previous module, comprehensible input, guided practice, and application, extension, and assessment. We will be focusing on comprehensible input in this module. The definition of comprehensible input is as follows. The key elements to remember are that it is 100% in the target language, there are periodic comprehension checks, and student production is limited. This step can be likened to filling the bucket. In other words, the teacher fills the students' minds with new learning. So I'm going to dive a little bit more here into detail into the various characteristics of comprehensible input. First of all, it is, as I mentioned, 100% in the target language. Now, what you may be thinking, or perhaps you're thinking, well, actually, I already knew that. Think back to your days in the teacher credentialing program, unless that is when the emphasis was audiolingual, or further back, the grammar translation methodology. Well, over the years, linguists have studied and improved upon techniques for teaching language so that the learner can actually use the language in real-world situations. Having the teacher use the target language to immerse students in the language and teach content in the language is not just a trend. It is linked to studies on language acquisition, and it is truly the best way to teach a foreign language. Now that you are over the shock of that first characteristics of comprehensible input, or perhaps you are relieved to finally hear that there's a group of world language teachers who support you in your endeavor to solely use the target language, here's the next key characteristic. The target language used by the instructor must be understandable. If you begin day 1 in your French 1 or Spanish 1 class going 100 miles per hour in the target language using idioms and words they have never heard, you will quickly lose your students. So here are some tips on how to make yourself understandable. First, if it is possible in your target language, use as many cognates as possible, especially in your lower level classes. For example, the word important in English, importante in Spanish. It's a simple word that the students will understand whether or not they've heard that word in Spanish before. Also, it will help to, if you can lower the effective filter before you begin instruction. That is the mental block that can be caused by stress, and it makes it difficult for students to receive the new information. A second way to make your comprehensible input understandable is repetition, repetition, repetition. The more you repeat new grammar structures for the students or new vocabulary words, the better and longer they will retain the new material. Repeat each new vocabulary word at least 7 times before you expect your students to produce it. A third way to make your comprehensible understandable is to use a lot of visuals. When students can connect a new vocabulary word to a picture, they will remember it quicker rather than having to connect the word in the target language to the word in their native language, and then finally to the image produced in their mind. With visuals, you eliminate the middle step of translation in the process from language to meaning. Finally, to make comprehensible input understandable to your students, you can use your own body language. Some of you may be laughing to yourselves, thinking already, isn't that what I do every day? World language teachers are actors and actresses who by nature tend to talk with their hands. That's great. Keep it up because it helps your students to understand you better. The third characteristic of comprehensible input is that it needs to be input plus 1. In other words, the new concept, whether it be a new structure, a new set of vocabulary words, or a cultural element, needs to be slightly beyond the student's current level. For example, let's say in a level 1 class, remember this is stage 1 as well, students already have become familiar with the structures I like, I do not like, do you like? Now you want to input something new for them. So we're doing input plus 1, and let's say what you would like to input are these 3 words: to eat, to run, and to dance. And now, one thing to note here is that when introducing new vocabulary, it is best not to go beyond 7 new words per day. Brain research shows that that's all students will remember in a day anyway, is 7 words. So why do more when you'll just have to reteach it again the next day? I mean, reteaching is great, repetition, but really, if you can stick to 7 words a day, you'll have better retention. Now, the teacher can do the comprehensible input in a way kind of like this. For example, let's see, you can see my mouse here. The teacher stands in front of the class and has these 3 pictures on the board with the words underneath them in their target language. So I have the words here in English, but you might have them in French, Spanish, Japanese. And I might point to the first picture and say something like, I like to eat. To eat. I like to eat hamburgers. I like to eat ice cream. I like to eat. To run. I do not like to run. And then point back to the picture to eat. I like to eat. I do not like to run. And then you could ask the students, while pointing to the picture to eat, I like to eat, yes or no? And the class responds yes. I like to run, and the class will say no. And I'll say, that's right, I do not like to run. And then I can add the third picture, I like to dance. I do like to dance. I do not like to run. I do like to eat. And then you could point to the picture of to dance, for example, and say, I like to eat, and the class can say no. And, oh, I like to dance? Yes, while I'm pointing to the picture to dance, they know that by now they keep hearing me say the words to eat, to run, to dance. They know when I point to the picture to dance, that is the word, the vocabulary word that I'm using there. So you go on like that using yes, no responses, and then either or. So I might point to the picture to run and say, I do not like to eat, or I do not like to run, and hopefully the students respond with to run. And then after that, I might point to the picture to eat and say, what do I like to do? And with enough repetition, hopefully your students will reply, to eat, to eat. And if they're more advanced, they might reply, you like to eat. So one more thing to note is that you do not want to overload your students with structures and vocabulary all at once if you can avoid it. Introduce a new structure one day and then introduce new vocabulary another day, or vice versa. You might introduce the vocabulary first and then another day introduce the new structure. So, another characteristic of comprehensible input is that it needs to be relevant to the students. So, for example, if you have a picture of Betty Davis, for example, the students are going to say, who's that? They've never heard of her before. But then if you show a picture of Hannah Montana, they're going to say, oh my God, she's so cool. And so try your best to stay current with the generation you are teaching. I like to have the students tell me who their favorite pop culture artists are, and then I learn from them what their interests are and what is relevant to them. Besides pop culture, think about what they are interested in at their age. For example, in my Spanish 1 class, the majority of my students are not interested in politics or the news. However, my Honors Spanish 4 students, mostly juniors and seniors, they love to discuss these topics, and we do. In my Spanish 1 class with my freshmen, we talk about school and what is cool to wear to school or not wear, what types of things they like to do when hanging out with friends, that sort of material. Keeping comprehensible input relevant to students leads into the next characteristic, which is to provide students with information that they would be able to use in the real world. Here are some examples of information they could use in the real world. And here are some non-examples. Hopefully with those examples and non-examples you can get the point there.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the Great Depression, passed the the tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? for? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.
Can I say any more? Please remember to present the new material in interesting ways, and the students will pay attention and remember what you are teaching them longer. Be energetic, enthusiastic, and have fun. Hopefully your students won't drool on your desks. The next characteristic of